Quote the disclaimer.
Damn it, Marvel. You've got every studio thinking they can pull off this look at all the stuff we made legacy logo bullshit. Calm down, DreamWorks. You've already got 3 boss baby scenes in this uninspired collage for Shrek's sake.
Okay, so I guess we're sending anniversary logos. What's your problem with them anyway, Jeremy? You expect DreamWorks to just be quiet about their special occasions? Also, there's more shots of Turbo, Abominable, and the Penguins of Madagascar if you desperately want something to complain about.
Also, a total of 45 seconds of logos, most of which are solely an excuse for the DreamWorks overlords to blow each other. Now that they've all finished and cleaned up, we can finally start the show.
And you just spent a total of 7 seconds complaining and being f***ing disgusting. Why can't you just sin actual mistakes in a film like a normal person?
Once upon a time, there were 2 trolls.
Once upon a time, narration cliche. And after consulting the official Book of Sins, I believe that adds up to be roughly, carry the 5, solve for p, cross, multiply, reduce the fraction, divide by pi, 2 sins!
That's cute, but it doesn't impress me. And despite showing your work, you still came up with the wrong answer. D+ at best.
Damn it, I was not alerted to take a massive amount of drugs before the beginning of this movie, and I'm very angry that I now have to pause it for approximately 37 minutes.
9 hells. If you got as high as a kite here, then no wonder these videos are the way they are. See, kids? This is what happens when you do drugs. Just say no.
This techno-troll raid was about as awkwardly misplaced as
Nah, not going any further. Neo's on the phone begging you not to bring that event up.
Queen Barb of the Hard Rock Trolls.
Nonsense! Everyone knows that rock's been dead since the advent of nu metal 25 years ago.
Ouch! That hurt, Jeremy. I mean, I mostly listen to pop punk, but rock isn't dead, Jeremy. And like Luke said in his video, rock has to be included in this movie as it's one of the 6 nations of music, like we see later.
Just a reminder, this entire musical battle with crystal clear stereo fidelity is happening underwater.
Okay, let me just remind you, Jeremy. Yes, you, that this is a movie based on a toy line where music has magical powers. This isn't our reality.
We are now headlong into Anna Kendrick doing her best Cyndi Lauper imitation for Trolls Just Want to Have Fun. Little known fact, this opening number barely beat California Trolls, Motley Crue's Trolls, 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 and Queen's Fat Bottom Trolls for the slot.
Time after time when I think Jeremy would have a change of heart, he shows his true colours and sins something he likes. What's going on, Jeremy? You're putting a hole in my heart. Don't be so primitive, let go of the Dear John, and let your audience have fun.
You know how Hamilton starts off with a musical number about the protagonist and gives you pretty much all the background you need to start in on an engaging story? Yeah, the first 5 minutes of this movie is the polar opposite of that.
That's not a sin, that's just a patented Jeremy opinion piece. For one, we already met several of these trolls in the first film, and for another, there's a lot missing from this opening sequence, including Branch's feelings for Poppy and the utter joy throughout Pop Village. Not to mention, we already started with the conflict of Barb wanting the 5 remaining strings.
Dude, even Justin Timberlake's avatar here looks like he's bored with just going through the motions in this sequel for another paycheck. Pep it up, JT!
Where in the world are you getting that from? Branch is only just finding himself again after years of depression and seclusion, and he actually even seems more joyful here.
And because someone said the phrase, good times, we're straight into a good times music video.
Do you mind explaining to us why that's wrong? Also, he name drops his now defunct music video sins channel, which aside from anything is at least 2 sins in and of itself.
Kids! Also, this is a worse cop-out for explaining reproduction than the f***ing stork story, man. Some kid is gonna walk out here with her pregnant mom and ask why her head isn't getting any bigger.
I'm fairly certain you would have been the only one dumb enough to have asked that, because most other kids would have at least had the brain capacity to know that babies aren't born from the head, or even from eggs.
That was some fancy footwork, Cooper.
Some people just got it.
You know, these assholes go out of their way to switch person, people, girl, boy, and so on for the blanket name troll for their species. So, when they do refer to themselves as people, what are we supposed to think? Do they do other human things like poop, or go through puberty, or become tax attorneys?
It's like I mentioned in the Shark Tale video I did with Luke. Just because these guys are a different species doesn't mean they can't refer to themselves as people. Secondly, we do see 2 out of 3 of those things in both these movies, with the aging and puberty of Branch and with Cooper pooping out cakes. Meanwhile, we don't see the tax attorney thing until Clay and Band Together. Finally, I feel compelled to bring up the other non-troll species in this movie franchise, such as the Bergens, the Vacationers, and the Mount Ragans.
5 it up?
It's not that bad. At least you came closer than any golfer trying to high-five their caddy after a good shot.
You do realise that before this, Branch was just told by Poppy that aside from being the queen, the most important thing in the world to her was being his friend, right? Which left him downtrodden because he has a crush on her?
It's a story as old as time.
Is it also a song as old as rhyme? Were they barely even friends and then somebody bent unexpectedly? Because I love it when people unexpectedly bend all of a sudden.
And just like with Aladdin in the How to Train Your Dragon remake, Jeremy's doing the same thing here with Beauty and the Beast, opening himself up to more sins than if he just sang the lyrics. And he does this again right after with Lord of the Rings, so no mercy.
Techno, funk, classical, country, hard rock, and pop.
Ah yes, the generally agreed upon 6 major musical genres. Let me hip-hop on over to Wikipedia to see if you wrapped up all the major sellers. Yeah, everything looks R&B. I mean A-OK.
All that gish gallop aside, Grandy Tobias and Moon had already mentioned other musical genres that were inspired by or relied on the 6 listed by Peppy. Funk music being the originator of rap and hip-hop, as we hear from Prince D, as well as disco mentioned by Branch. Jazz is reliant on the use of classical instruments. K-pop is essentially a subculture of Korean pop, and various types of punk, grunge, metal and more relied on the hard rock genre, which you would have inferred from the subtext if you had listened to Peppy saying, and every kind of music in between.
That's why we need to keep our strings safe.
Wait, this has been here hidden only by a thin curtain this whole time? No one has noticed this in Pop Village since the dawn of trolldom?
No, because Pop Village didn't exist in the age of trolldom. It was set up after the Pop Troll tribe escaped the Troll Tree in Bergentown at the beginning of the first movie, which, if you were actually paying attention, you would know. So given this, they had to bring the string with them during their escape.
They just left the ancient super secret scroll out on the rock? The security in this village is so shitty, I'm wondering why they haven't been invaded and occupied before now.
Because at the time, they would have still been at the Troll Tree in the centre of Bergentown, and no other troll nations would dare go there unless they had a death wish. And since taking the strings and going their separate ways, they would have been worlds apart for a long time, even with this journey to the new Pop Village. Oh yeah, and the f***ing laugh too.
Goodbye.
Remind me why we care about this c***o's journey again? I'm convinced the actual leads in this movie have about 6 lines of dialogue apiece.
Because this is where we find out that Cooper is a funk troll, and it explains why he was the only one in Pop Village who looked different to the others. It also ties in with the themes of identity, difference, and equality, and says that these things should not be foregone or made less important, because if there were no differences in the trolls or even in ourselves, there would be no uniqueness.
Only 4 more strings to go until rock unites the world.
I like how this movie presents rock as the primary antagonist. Makes me feel nostalgic, like Dee Snider's about to appear before a Senate subcommittee and lambast Tipper Gore.
Boy howdy, you're gonna love Rock of Ages. But still, sending something you like.
Why is he piloting this balloon at all, considering it was shown to be sentient a few minutes ago?
Okay, I'm not an expert on hot air balloons in particular, so don't take me as fact, but I did look it up. You do realize that in hot air balloons, you have to pilot the air for a hot air balloon, especially the hot air, right? So, even if she wasn't sentient, they still have to filter the air out, right? So, this is being realistic.
Alright, Poppy, easy on the buttons!
Weird, this is the exact feedback I keep getting during foreplay. I still have no clue what it means.
Okay, audience, raise your hand if you needed to hear that from Jeremy. Oh, no one's hand is raised? Cool. Then here's what I think of your joke, Jeremy.
That's just my man stuff.
I love man stuff.
Once again, why the gender specificity? Oh, I thought they were all just trolls, damn it. If they function like humans, why did Glitter Troll, who's supposed to be male, give birth to Tiny Diamond?
My guess, according to what Grandy Tobias said, is either Guy Diamond may not have always been Guy Diamond, if you catch my drift, or he was holding his partner's egg in his hair, much like how male emperor penguins hold their eggs in what's called a brood pouch. Otherwise, Moon's theory suggesting that it was asexual reproduction. So go ahead and take your pick, Jeremy.
Also, I may or may not have listened to Andrew Kendrick say I love man stuff over 10 times in a row with my eyes closed right now. I have issues.
Jeremy, this is a therapy session. Put your pants back on.
You may want to take a look at this.
Normally I'd just do a regular sin for this, you better come take a look at this cliche. But it's even worse that it's already directly in Poppy's line of sight. One extra, you assholes.
Objection argumentative. Also misleading, as Poppy and Branch were stuck deep in conversation about his weapons and how to deal with Barb before Biggie pointed this out to them. You know, the scene you just showed before this.
Because your music is so boring.
Hey, you, metalhead buddy. Even Metallica cut a record with the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra, so you should know better than this.
You may have a point there, and probably bonus points if you mention progressive rock groups as well, but the point of this is Barb only wants a world of hard rock and heavy metal, so even though classical trolls can help in other genres, Barb doesn't want that.
She took everyone.
Why is that? Don't they just need the magical strings? And where the hell did they have the room on those ships to stow everyone?
I'd say that there's plenty of room in the back of those ships, since we see them all pressed up against the rear window grate. And secondly, she's taking the residents and rulers as well as the strings because she wants to turn every single troll into rock zombie trolls during her concert.
What is this? Pop trolls?
Yes, the one group you apparently sent an invitation instead of just straight up attacking. An invitation you sent with this very bat, so I'm confused at your confusion.
That wouldn't exactly be true, as given what we hear later from Delta Dawn, invitations were sent out to the other troll societies like the Country Trolls and the Pop Trolls, but some either just never got them or were never even sent one, hence the confusion and shock on King Trollex and Trollzart's faces when Barb comes a-knockin'. Similarly, Barb wasn't expecting a response to any of them, let alone an RSVP from Poppy.
Oh, I need that pop string. And I know who's gonna help me. The most feared bounty hunters in all of Trolldom.
Why does Barb need bounty hunters? She's been beating the shit out of all the other villages so far. What makes her think the weenie-ass Pop Village would put up a fight?
Because they're going after Poppy to get her strings since they're moving around the nations. Meanwhile, Barb is still attacking the other villages, like we see with the Funk Trolls later, and when Biggie returns to Pop Village, seeing it ransacked.
Movie wastes a badass Kelly Clarkson performance of a pretty good song by putting it in this movie.
This counts as sinning something you like, by the way.
Am I not cute anymore? Come on.
Now that's what I call humor, volume 57.
Like you produced anything better. Also, weirdly, Universal and Sony are on the phone wanting their compilation albums back.
Did this movie just make a Tremors reference? Because honestly, I'd prefer to be swallowed by a graboid right now rather than have to watch any more of this nonsense.
Further proof that Jeremy dislikes watching movies. No wonder his media literacy is terrible. Also, sinning a movie for making pop culture references. You know it's not a one-way street, right?
Well, hope pop trolls can swim.
Hickory apparently went to the Wild Ethelbert Coyote School of Delayed Gravitying Things.
Oh, for the love of troll. This isn't our reality.
And who are you supposed to be, Cowboy Pants?
Even if he's in a sort of disguise, how the hell does Chaz not recognize one of the only other bounty hunters in the Trollverse?
I'm fairly certain there might have been more bounty hunters than just the reggaeton, K-pop, jazz and yodeler tribes, but those four were the only ones Barb could hire quickly enough before the concert. Also, once again, seeing ahead in this movie so you have the background info on who Hickory is, though we didn't see them attend the meeting that you omitted to broadcast.
You made a pinky promise to me, Queen Poppy, and you broke it.
Did she, though? She promised that she would protect you no matter what, and as of now, you're still just fine. So really, that promise seems to me to be fully intact until you're dead. So either die or shut your wine hole, you overgrown smirk.
On the one hand, I commend you cussing out James Corden like that, and I agree with your sentiment about Biggie's frustration going too far here. On the other hand, however, he's actually got a point. As if Hickory didn't intervene, Chaz would have immediately handed Poppy, Branch and Biggie over to Barb after the Jazznosis. Also, Poppy here is again not taking responsibility for this mission that nearly went wrong several times and seems unappreciative of any advice that she's been given, especially by Branch.
How is this possible?
Well, it's a very complicated story.
One that we somehow have time to tell, since the A story is roughly 22 minutes long, and we thought that we needed to stretch to feature length to make a mint at the box office, but then yada yada yada, there won't be a third one of these.
The irony is delicious. The attitude's a little stale, though.
I want you to meet the king and queen of funk.
Why do some territories have a king but others don't? Is there a king of pop? Why is no one mentioning the king of pop?
You mean King Peppy? From the first movie? Before he passed the throne to his daughter Poppy?
I think your map is a bit outdated.
Oh, he's right. Look at that. It still has disco.
It most assuredly does not. When we first learned of the story of the strings, there were only 6, and they were divided into techno, funk, classical, country, hard rock, and pop. And the strings they represent are the whole basis of this story. Sure, the king was lying about the background, but they're looking at the map he presented them.
Need I remind you of the story, since for copyright reasons you had to cut it down?
They took 6 strings, and those 6 strings had the power to control all music. They could play anything. Techno, funk, classical, country, hard rock, and pop. And every kind of music in between. There was something for everyone.
He said every kind of music in between, not just those main 6, like the examples I gave earlier, and even a mix of other genres that I didn't even expand any further on. But disco has origins in pop and funk, so the implication is that there are, or maybe were, disco trolls.
Oh yeah, I've heard this story before.
Right there with you, Poppy.
Actually, that's not the case, as what Peppy told Poppy was how it was originally written as an amicable split, whereas King Quincy and Queen Essence are saying that it was the pop trolls that tried to monopolise the music world and discount the other 5.
Dude, is it just me, or has this expositional funk song been going on for like 48% of the entire movie?
Oh, look at that. You f***ed up your percentages again. Maybe I should get you a maths tutor. Anyway, like Luke said, it goes on for only 2 minutes, and if it wasn't there, Poppy wouldn't understand Barb's plot for the troll societies.
Denying our differences is denying the truth of who we are.
How did they get George Clinton to voice this shit? Seriously, did they pay him in a boatload of multicolored robes and purple kush?
Really? That's your first thought? Not that, like Timberlake, Kendrick, and the rest, Clinton was interested in being involved?
Fidget spinners.
They're turntables, you idiot.
How the hell did the rock assholes find the funk trolls? They're not even in their designated land, man. They're in a mobile goddamn spaceship.
So you're telling me that you wouldn't notice a huge-ass spaceship in the middle of the sky blasting all types of funk from James Brown to Earth, Wind and Fire?
Oh look, there's Branch singing a sad song after he had a superficial beef with Poppy that will almost immediately be squashed. It's almost like I haven't seen this in every animated kids movie in the last 25 years.
And you want to know why it's there? Because conflict happens for a reason! Hell, you cut out the entire scene of Branch and Poppy arguing in the bubble after being ejected from the funk troll ship, and after he left, he asked, why does he still care about her more than anyone else in the world? Plus, you're sinning perfect for me. I mean, if I was going to listen to Timberlake's music, I'd more so crank up one of his songs with NSYNC. But still!
All music should be saved.
Alright, okay. I'm listening, Pop Troll.
So that's all it took to convince these hardened bounty hunters? Nobody's ever mentioned this to them before?
The idea was that if either Chaz, the reggaeton crew, the K-pop gang, or Hickory and Dickory, the yodelers, could get Barb the string, she'll keep their genre safe, which was in their own interest because they're bounty hunters. Besides, Branch made these groups question their loyalty to Barb and got them to turn against her in another scene that you omitted to broadcast.
Poppy, take the string and run as fast as you can, you hear me?
I haven't seen a Sam Rockwell performance in which he's obviously posing as the good guy that will turn out to be the bad guy since 2000's Charlie's Angels.
Jeremy invents a problem out of thin air cliche.
Leave you alone? I'm sorry, you were the one who was all desperate to be best friends.
Sure, but you were the one who apparently burnt the invitation, only to later carry around with you just in case you needed to make this point.
Maybe because she wanted to taunt Poppy with it? Or make reference to her changing her mind being a bad thing? In other words, Barb would be excellent at CinemaSins.
Okay, come on. Let's go, let's go, let's go.
Speaking of going, how did you get here so fast? Or even know where you were going in the first place? It's a lot of transportation BS that I, for one, would have loved to have seen.
Nah, you wouldn't. Because you'd seen it for exposition and it would have taken too long anyway. This contradictive bullshit of you wanting the movie to explain everything but wanting it to be shorter is just nothing short of annoying.
Play the ultimate power chord and then... You'll see!
Rock tease.
Oh look, a boner joke. How original.
I'd give all the sins back if Barb just started playing God Gave Rock and Roll to You, like they did at the end of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. I don't care if it's the Argent, Kiss, or even the Petra version.
No, you wouldn't. Stop lying. And besides, she's going for something harder here, which is why she's performing Barracuda.
So, to summarize the last few minutes of the movie, Barb is turning all the non-rock trolls into rock zombie trolls, and I guarantee you it's only so they can merchandise some goth trolls to vulnerable kids after this came out.
Oh, come the f*** on, Jeremy. This look rocks all we've ever seen from Poppy, and much like Grandy Tobias, I'd be willing to pay anything for a toy of this.
In a second, you'll find out she's faking this. That's right, she's somehow faking a completely changed outfit and glowing red eyes. Feel free to just go with it, but I've got a job to do here.
You could at least join us in the going with it thing, because she blocked out the sound of the ultimate power cord by stuffing gumdrops in her ears like Hickory did for Chaz. Not to mention you sinned gumdrop shadowing earlier, and sinned the use of the gumdrops again later, so because of this, 3 sins. And while Grandy Tobias said that the real sin is that this works, and I personally agree from experience at a Foo Fighters concert in 2015, I'd just like to point out here that even though this seems unrealistic, it's kind of supposed to be.
Those are my sons, making music.
Stage parents.
That would be a hell of a lot funnier if King Quincy and Queen Essence weren't the ones on or close to the stage.
It's alright, Barbara. Just let everyone be what they want to be.
Seems like Daddy Ozzy's been on board with this plan all along, so why'd he let Barb run amok this long? Hell, she was 2 gumdrops away from f***ing the whole world up.
Sinning the Prince of Darkness? Okay, now you've done it. All aboard the crazy train.
You know, I was going to take a sin off for the good message of merging all the types of music into one harmonious medley.
Telling more fibs than Pinocchio.
Shall we?
Wow, that's intimate. I'm pretty sure this is the troll version of anal.
Gross.
Now that's a good connection.
Okay, that's kind of a cheesy pointless callback, but at least we don't have to deal with another lazy flannel graph exposition dump.
In the beginning, we were divided.
Damn it!
Oh, I'm sorry, but thanks for playing.
Closing credits contain no Can't Stop the Feeling.
Hold on. Since when did you like that song? You called it a troll setup and a Song of the Summer cash grab in the previous movie. Oh, and before I forget, sorry, Luke.
I think this movie unintentionally provided more nightmare fuel than the Dark Crystal, man.
But regardless, there have been many instances of animated movies having things that are supposed to be scary, such as Oogie Boogie's death in The Night Before Christmas, The Otherworld in Coraline, and Chihiro's parents becoming pigs and spirited away.
And with that, court is adjourned. Be sure to leave any more suggestions for CinemaSins sins down below, and I will see you all in the next video.